Daniel lived quietly on the alien world, far from the busy cities and the shining towers where the natives celebrated their own culture. He was an old soldier, a man who had seen battles and the silence after battles. His days were simple, caring for the little farm he had built, drinking his tea while watching the twin suns rise and speaking to no one. The aliens did not care for him. To them, he was only a reminder of an inferior species, a man who belonged to a race mocked for their weakness. They said humans were loud, emotional, and fragile. But on this evening, things would change in ways none of them expected. The invitation came not as a request, but as a command. A messenger arrived at his door, sharp and cold in tone. Daniel was told to attend the great feast held in the Hall of the Alien Lords. It was an honor, they said, though Daniel could feel the weight of mockery in the messenger's voice. He knew he was not invited as a guest of respect. He was called to be a show, an object of ridicule, something to laugh at after the feast. Still, he went. Perhaps it was his soldier's discipline, perhaps his stubborn pride. Whatever the reason, he walked into the hall that night with his shoulders straight and his face calm. The hall was filled with light. Long tables stretched from one wall to the other, piled high with food that shimmered with strange colors, fruits that smelled sharp, meat that still steamed, and drinks that bubbled like rivers of fire. The aliens filled the place with noise and laughter, their many eyes and fangs gleaming under the light. Daniel was the only human there. As he entered, silence fell for a moment, a pause heavy with judgment. Then came the whispers, the chuckles, the half-hidden laughter. Some pointed, others smirked, and Daniel kept walking until he was shown to a place at the edge of the hall. They offered him food he did not touch. They offered him drink he refused. He sat quietly, watching, listening. He knew this was leading somewhere. He could feel it in the air. It was not long before one of the younger aliens, bold and proud, rose to his feet. He carried with him a strange instrument, long and curved like a horn but strung with glowing threads. The Xenotone. Its sound was unlike anything humans had ever made. It was both string and voice, light and vibration. To the aliens, it was a sacred tool of culture, though few cared for its deeper meaning anymore. They used it to entertain, to boast of skill, or to humiliate strangers. The young alien slammed the Xenotone on the table, making the strings sing a sharp note. All eyes turned to Daniel. The alien's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Human," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "We have heard your kind likes noise. You pound on skins, you blow into hollow bones, you scrape strings and call it music. But this," he lifted the Xenotone high, "this is true art. Would you try it? Play us something. Make us laugh." The hall erupted with laughter and clapping hands. The sound echoed through the tall chamber. Some shouted jokes, others whispered insults. They expected Daniel to refuse, or worse, to try and fail. They wanted to see the human make a fool of himself in front of the lords and the warriors, in front of the crowd that despised his kind. It was a trap dressed as entertainment. Daniel did not answer at once. He looked at the instrument, at the glowing strings, and then at the faces around him. He saw no kindness there, no welcome, only hunger for humiliation. But he did not flinch. He stood, slowly, with the weight of years in his movements. The hall grew quieter, expecting some excuse, some surrender. Instead, Daniel stepped forward. The young alien sneered as he shoved the Xenotone into Daniel's hands. It was heavier than it looked, alive almost, as if it breathed through the strings. Daniel sat on the small stool in the center of the hall, and the crowd leaned in to watch. "Go on then, human," someone shouted. "Show us your great music." More laughter followed, cruel and sharp. But Daniel's face was calm, his eyes thoughtful. He had never touched this instrument before, never even heard its full song. Still, he placed his hands on the strings with care, the way a soldier handles his rifle, the way a man holds something sacred. The hall went quiet, waiting for him to make a mistake. Every breath seemed to pause. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the noise fade, letting the jeers turn into silence in his mind. He remembered Earth, the sounds of old songs, the echo of voices long gone. His fingers moved, slow at first, uncertain, like a man learning to walk again. A broken note came out, sharp and ugly, and the crowd howled with laughter. But Daniel did not stop. He pressed on, searching, feeling the hidden pattern within the strings. The laughter echoed, but he ignored it. He knew what they wanted, but he also knew what music was. To him, music was not for pride or for mockery. It was for memory. It was for the heart. His hands began to find their rhythm. The hall, though still buzzing with laughter, started to notice something different in his touch. The strings did not rebel. They began to hum, to respond, as if the xenotone itself was curious. Daniel leaned into it, letting his soul guide his fingers. The challenge was no longer between him and the aliens. The challenge was between him and the silence that waited to be broken. And Daniel was ready to break it in a way they would never forget. Daniel's eyes stayed closed as his fingers moved slowly across the glowing strings. The first sound was rough, a strange clash of notes that made many aliens burst into new laughter. They slapped the tables, pointed their clawed fingers, and whispered sharp jokes at his expense. But Daniel's face did not change. He did not let their laughter reach inside him. Instead, he took a slow breath, like a soldier steadying his aim before pulling the trigger. He touched the strings again, softer this time, and a gentler sound filled the air. The aliens quieted just a little, waiting for another mistake. But Daniel did not stop. His fingers pressed again, sliding across the light-threaded strings. The sound wavered, uncertain, like the voice of a child learning to speak. Some laughed again, but others tilted their heads. There was something in the sound, not just noise, not just clumsy hands. It was searching for something deeper. Daniel leaned forward, his rough hands moving with care, trying to remember not what the instrument was, but what music meant. He thought of Earth. He thought of campfires, of voices singing under the stars, of his mother's humming in the kitchen long ago. He remembered the sound of his fellow soldiers singing quietly the night before a battle, their voices trembling but strong, holding on to courage through melody. He carried those memories into his hands, letting them guide him. The strings answered. The next sound was clearer, softer, almost warm. It stretched across the hall like a whisper. The aliens began to fall silent. The young alien who had mocked him folded his arms, smirking, but even he leaned closer, listening. The sound that came from the xenotone was different from how they usually played it. Aliens struck it hard, sharp, with power, turning it into something loud and cold. But Daniel's hands were gentle, patient. The instrument hummed like it was waking from a long sleep, and the sound reached corners of the hall that had never felt such a tone before. The laughter stopped almost completely now. Only a few whispered remarks broke the air, but even those faded. Daniel's playing was changing. The strings sang together, weaving notes into a pattern, shaky at first, but slowly growing stronger. The sound carried a strange sadness, the kind that clings to the heart even when no words explain it. An old alien, seated near the front, blinked his many eyes. He felt something unfamiliar in his chest, something tight, as though the sound was reaching inside him. He did not understand it, and that frightened him. A child near him stopped chewing the sweet fruit she had been given, her small hands frozen as her ears twitched. The soft hum of Daniel's music held her still, her wide eyes fixed on the human. Daniel's fingers moved faster now, not with the arrogance of a showman, but with the calm focus of a man telling a story. Each string gave him a voice, and together they began to form a tale. It was a tale of long journeys, of battles fought and lost, of people loved and left behind. He did not speak, yet the sound of the xenotone spoke for him. The hall grew stiller with every note. Some aliens frowned, confused by the strange pull of the melody. Their world did not value music as humans did. To them, it was a game, a trick for festivals, a way to boast. But here, in the hands of a human, the xenotone was more than sound. It was alive. It carried weight. It carried history. The mocking smiles began to fade, replaced by blank stares, by eyes that could not look away. Daniel's back straightened, and his face showed no pride, only concentration. His eyes remained closed. His lips pressed together tightly, as if he was holding back tears. His fingers traced the strings in patterns that felt older than himself. He was not copying the alien's way of playing. He was letting the xenotone become a bridge between his heart and theirs. The young alien who had mocked him finally stopped smiling. His claws tapped against his armrest nervously. He wanted to laugh again, to say something sharp, but the words would not come. His throat felt tight, and he hated that feeling. Across the hall, the lords watched in silence, their sharp eyes unblinking, their ears bent toward the sound. No one had expected this. The music grew deeper, thicker, like a storm forming quietly on the horizon. Daniel's hands no longer trembled. They moved with strength now, finding harmony in the alien strings. The sound echoed like a river flowing through stones, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, always steady. The hall that once roared with cruel laughter was now filled with something else: suspense. Every alien waited for the next note, as if it carried something they could not afford to miss. The soft glow of the Xenotone strings reflected in their eyes, turning them all toward the man who had been nothing more than a subject of mockery a few moments ago. Daniel breathed deeply as he played, his chest rising and falling like he was pouring every part of himself into the sound. The melody stretched longer, weaving threads of sorrow and hope into the air. The aliens sat frozen, their food untouched, their drinks forgotten. Some felt a strange sting in their eyes, though they did not know why. What began as a mockery was turning into something none of them had expected. The human, the man they had called weak and fragile, was commanding the hall without words, without weapons, only with music. And though many of them had come to laugh at his failure, they now found themselves leaning closer, silent, their hearts uneasy. The challenge had changed. It was no longer about humiliating a human. It was about surviving what his music was awakening inside them. And as Daniel's fingers moved faster and the melody deepened, not one alien dared to speak. They could only listen, waiting, while the human guided them into a world they had never known. The hall had been filled with laughter only minutes ago, but now a strange silence wrapped itself around everyone. Daniel's fingers moved slowly, gently pressing and pulling the glowing strings of the Xenotone. The sound that rose was not loud, not proud, but soft and deep, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. The aliens leaned forward without realizing it, their breaths caught in their throats. They had mocked him, but now they could not laugh. Something in the melody held them prisoner. The notes were not simple. They carried weight, like footsteps on a long and painful road. Each sound seemed to tell a secret, something unspoken that touched the listeners in places they did not even know existed inside them. Aliens, who believed themselves beyond such fragile things as human emotion, began to feel something strange in their chests. The beat of their hearts slowed, their bodies frozen as if time itself had paused. Daniel did not open his eyes. His face was calm but heavy, like a man lost in memory. The melody twisted and stretched, weaving sorrow with a kind of hope, a mixture so powerful that no one could turn away. Some aliens clenched their fists on the table, not because they were angry, but because they could not understand why their throats ached. Others shifted in their seats, feeling restless, as if they wanted to cry but had forgotten how. Then it happened. A small alien child, sitting close to her mother, began to cry. The sound was not loud, not a scream, just a trembling whimper that grew into tears sliding down her face. She didn't know why she cried. She only knew the music made her heart hurt, but in a strange and beautiful way. Her mother tried to hush her, but even she had no strength to scold because her own eyes were wet. The hall noticed. The silence grew deeper. The mocking smirks were gone now, replaced by uneasy expressions. The music had gone beyond entertainment. It was no longer something to laugh at. It was reaching inside them, pulling out feelings they had buried, feelings they thought they never had. Daniel's fingers moved with more confidence, finding the hidden rhythm that connected him to the instrument. The Xenotone glowed brighter under his touch, as if the alien device had been waiting for a human hand all along. The sound vibrated in the walls, in the floor, even in the bones of every listener. It was not just music. It was memory. It was sorrow. It was love and loss. Daniel thought of his home, the blue sky of Earth, the voices of people long gone. He remembered battlefields where laughter had died, where silence had been filled only with the cries of the wounded. He remembered the faces of comrades who never returned and the empty places left at tables after the war. All of it came pouring out through his hands, through the glowing strings. He had no words to share these memories, but the music carried them like a river carrying fallen leaves. One alien warrior, scarred and proud, felt his chest tighten. He remembered his own fallen brothers, though he had never allowed himself to grieve. Their culture told him tears were weakness, but now, listening to the human, he felt something break inside. He lowered his head, his jaw trembling. his eyes burning with moisture he could no longer control. Across the hall, nobles shifted uneasily. They had invited the human from mockery, yet now they sat powerless, unable to move, unable to speak. Some looked away, ashamed that they had laughed at him. Others could not look away at all, their gazes locked on his closed eyes and steady hands. The music rose higher, a gentle wave of sound, and then dipped low again, soft like a mother's lullaby. The emotions in the room twisted tighter, and not one alien could resist it. For the first time in their lives, they understood what it meant to feel the weight of another's soul. Daniel did not see their tears, but he felt the silence. He knew they were listening in a way they had never listened before. He pressed harder on the strings, the sound trembling like a heart that refuses to stop beating, even when broken. The room was heavy now, so heavy it felt like even the air had turned into stone. No one moved, no one spoke. They were all caught in his story, though it was told without a single word. The child cried louder now, her little hands covering her face. Her mother pulled her close, but she herself was sobbing silently, her shoulders shaking. The sound of their tears did not break the moment. It became part of it. The melody carried them, wrapping around their grief, turning it into something almost sacred. Aliens who once thought music was only skill now realized it was more than skill. It was life itself, carved into sound. It was pain given shape. It was love given voice. They had never believed humans capable of such depth. To them, humans were weak, fragile creatures. Yet here was one human, sitting in silence, holding them all in the palm of his hand, with nothing but music. The hall had no laughter left, no strength for mockery. The only sound was the trembling notes of the Xenotone and the soft weeping of those who could no longer hold back their tears. Even the lords, who prided themselves on cold dignity, felt their eyes wet, though they tried to hide it. But there was no hiding now. The human had torn open their walls and shown them a truth they never wanted to see. Daniel continued to play, lost in his own memories, but he knew, deep inside, that this was no longer about him. It was about them. He was showing them something they had never felt, something they would never forget. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with hearts breaking and mending at the same time. And still, Daniel's eyes remained closed, his fingers dancing gently over the glowing strings, carrying the hall deeper into the storm of sorrow and hope that no alien could resist. The music carried the hall into a place none of them had ever been before. Daniel's hands did not hesitate now. His fingers flowed across the glowing strings as if he had been born to play the Xenotone. Each note was more than sound. It was a story, a memory brought alive in the air. The aliens could feel it. They were not just hearing music, they were walking through his past with him. The first story was of war. The strings cried out with a low, heavy sound that shook the walls. It was the sound of boots on muddy ground, of guns firing in the distance, of smoke and fire that turned the sky black. The aliens felt their hearts race, as if they were standing on that battlefield themselves. They could hear the shouts of soldiers, the cries of the wounded, the silence of those who would never rise again. Even though they had never been on Earth, they could see it in their minds because Daniel poured it into the melody. Then the sound softened, changing into something fragile. The notes became light, almost trembling, like the touch of a hand that was about to slip away forever. Daniel remembered his friends who had not survived, and the music carried that grief to everyone listening. One alien covered his face with his claws, ashamed of the tears that slipped between them. Another clenched her fists, trying to fight the emotions, but the more she fought, the harder the music struck her heart. The story shifted again. Daniel played a gentle rhythm, a sound that felt like warmth. It was not about war now. It was about love, about family, about home. He remembered his mother's voice when she sang to him as a child. He remembered sitting by the fire, listening to stories told in laughter, watching the simple joy of life. The melody wrapped the hall in that warmth, and many aliens felt something they could not name. Some of them had never known such comfort, such closeness. Their culture was proud and cold, built on strength and dominance. But here, through a human song, they felt the meaning of belonging. A quiet sob echoed in the hall. It came from an alien woman dressed in fine silks. She had lost her mate many seasons ago, and she had never allowed herself to cry. Yet now the music tore open her heart. She pressed her face into her hands, and tears poured freely. The melody did not mock her grief. It carried it, accepted it, and gave it a voice. Daniel kept playing, his face still calm but his heart burning. He let the memories come one after another. He played the sound of laughter, quick and bright, like children running through fields. He played the sound of sorrow, heavy and sharp, like stones falling into a deep well. He played the sound of hope, soft but unbreakable, like the first light of dawn after a long night. Each alien in the hall felt the changes inside themselves, their emotions rising and falling with the music. The Xenotone itself seemed to glow brighter with every story he told. Its strings pulsed with light, reflecting the colors of the sound. Some aliens whispered that it had never shone so brightly before. They realized that the human was not just playing. It was as if the instrument had been waiting for him, waiting for someone who could truly understand it. The hall that once roared with mockery was now drowned in silence and tears. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the servants carrying trays had stopped moving, frozen with wide eyes and trembling hands. The lords on their golden seats sat stiffly, their cold masks broken by wet cheeks. For the first time in their lives, the aliens understood what music could be. To them, it had always been skill, a way to boast, a way to show power or tradition. But in Daniel's hands, music was something alive, something that reached into the soul and refused to let go. One warrior who had mocked the human earlier now bowed his head low. His chest rose and fell quickly, and his eyes shone with tears. He remembered his own brother who had died in battle, and suddenly he felt the grief he had buried for years. Another alien, one of the nobles, whispered softly, This is truth." Daniel's song filled the hall with memories that were not just his. The aliens began to feel their own memories rising inside them. They remembered the people they had lost, the moments they had hidden, the pain they had refused to feel. The music was pulling those hidden wounds into the open. It was not cruel. It was healing. The sound rose higher, stronger, as Daniel pressed the strings harder. The hall trembled with it. The melody was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone there. Their tears, their silence, their beating hearts all became part of the song. Daniel did not open his eyes, but he could feel it. He knew he had reached them. He had shown them what humanity carried inside, the ability to turn pain into beauty, to turn loss into memory, to turn silence into song. The aliens who had thought humans weak were now broken open by the strength of his spirit. The last notes of this part of the melody fell softly, like the final words of a prayer. They drifted into the still air, leaving behind a hall filled with trembling bodies and wet eyes. The mocking had died. The arrogance had faded. What remained was the truth they could not deny. Music was not just sound, and humans were not weak. Every alien in the hall would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. And Daniel, with closed eyes and steady hands, kept playing, carrying them all deeper into the story of his soul. The melody grew heavier, carrying a storm inside it. Daniel's hands pressed harder against the glowing strings, and the Xenotone answered with a sound that shook the hall like thunder rolling across distant mountains. The music was no longer only soft sorrow or gentle hope. It was fire, it was rage, it was pain bursting out after being buried for too long. Every note was sharp, like a blade cutting through silence, and every alien in the room felt the strike of it in their hearts. The alien commander seated near the front had always been a proud figure, a veteran of many wars. He had seen death, and he had given orders that caused more of it. Yet he had never allowed himself to grieve, never allowed weakness to show. But as the human played, something inside him broke. The melody carried him back to the battlefield where he had lost his sons. He remembered the day he returned home to silence, to an empty place at the table, to the eyes of his mate who never smiled again. He had locked that memory away, hidden it under armor of pride. But now, with each trembling note, the wall he built crumbled. The commander lowered his head, and to the shock of everyone around him, his shoulders began to shake. His chest heaved, and then tears poured down his face. A great warrior wept like a child. The music only grew stronger. Daniel's fingers danced with fury and grace, pouring all of his soul into the Xenotone. The glowing strings pulsed brighter, as if they could barely contain the power of the human spirit flowing through them. It was no longer only Daniel playing. It was as though the instrument itself had chosen him, had joined him, and together they were commanding the hall. The nobles shifted uneasily in their seats. Their people were not used to tears. They believed emotions were weakness, something to be hidden, something dangerous. But now the music was tearing their walls down one by one. A noblewoman covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stop the sob that escaped her throat. Another gripped the arm of his chair so tightly that the wood cracked under his strength, but still the tears fell down his face. They could not stop them. The music would not allow it. The hall was no longer a place of feasting and laughter. It had turned into something sacred. The glow of the Xenotone reflected in every tear, shining like stars falling from alien eyes. The weeping spread across the room, quiet at first, then louder. Even the servants, who had been told all their lives to stay silent and invisible, stood frozen with wet faces, their trays shaking in their hands. No one dared laugh anymore. No one dared call the human weak. Daniel felt the storm inside himself too. The memories of his home, his friends, and all he had lost burned through him as he played. Each note was heavy with truth, a truth that could not be hidden or denied. The melody became a wave crashing over the hall, pulling everyone into it, drowning them in sorrow and beauty at the same time. The Xenotone began to glow so brightly that some thought it might break apart. It pulsed with every beat of Daniel's heart, as if the instrument itself was alive. For years, aliens had used it for their shallow games, but never had it sung like this. Never had it burned with this much light. It was as if the Xenotone had been waiting all its life for a human to show it what music truly was. The aliens stared at Daniel in awe. He was not young, not powerful in body, not armed with weapons or armor. Yet here he was, commanding them all, bringing them to their knees with nothing but music. They began to realize what strength really meant. It was not only the strength to fight or to conquer. It was the strength to feel, to carry pain, to turn grief into something so powerful it could make even the proudest warriors weep. One alien elder whispered into the silence between notes, "This is not music. This is truth." His voice trembled, and others nodded, too broken to speak. Daniel played harder, letting the music rise to its highest point. It was no longer just his story. It had become their story, too. The pain of every alien in the hall joined with his, the sorrow of their own hidden memories rising up to the surface. Together, all of their griefs became one great wave of sound. Some fell to their knees, unable to remain seated under the weight of it. Others pressed their faces into their hands, shaking with sobs. The commander, still weeping, whispered the names of his sons as if they stood before him again. The noblewoman whispered the name of her lost mate. Everywhere in the hall, names were whispered, the dead remembered, grief finally given a voice after years of silence. And through it all, Daniel kept playing, pouring his soul into the Xenotone, never stopping, never faltering. The storm of the music reached its peak. The notes were wild now, spinning like fire through the air, but still carrying beauty within them. It was pain turned into art, loss turned into strength. The hall trembled with it, every alien heart breaking and healing at the same time. Then slowly Daniel began to let the sound fall. The storm softened, the wild waves settling into a quiet rhythm. His fingers slowed, the strings glowing gently again instead of burning bright. The melody grew calm, like a river after rain. The tears continued to fall, but now they were softer, less painful, almost peaceful. The aliens breathed heavily, their bodies shaking, but their eyes clearer than before. Daniel did not speak. He had no need to. The music had said everything. He looked like a man who had given away a piece of his soul, but he kept playing, guiding them out of the storm he had brought. The Xenotone hummed with the last traces of its light, glowing like the fading sun after a long, terrible day. And the aliens, broken and silent, realized that they had witnessed something far greater than they had ever imagined. The human had shown them their own hidden hearts, and none of them would ever forget it. Daniel's hands slowed as the storm of music began to fade. The hall that had once been roaring with laughter now sat in deep silence, broken only by the sound of trembling breaths. His fingers touched the glowing strings softly, letting the melody fall into something calm and gentle. Each note stretched longer, carried further, as if refusing to leave the hearts of those who listened. The Xenotone no longer burned with fierce light. It glowed warmly now, like embers after a fire, soothing yet powerful. The aliens sat frozen. None dared move, afraid even the sound of shifting in their seats would break the spell that held them. They had never known silence could feel so heavy, so alive. Their tears had slowed, but their faces remained wet, their chests aching. They were no longer only hearing a human play. They were part of the music itself, bound together by what he had poured into the hall. Daniel felt the weight of every eye on him, but his own eyes stayed closed. His face carried no pride, only the quiet strength of a man who had given everything. His hands moved gently, pulling the last threads of the melody together, weaving them into a single line of sound that stretched across the hall. It was fragile, like the last heartbeat of someone loved, yet strong enough to linger in the soul forever. The music slowed further, each note echoing longer before fading away. The hall was filled with suspense. Every alien waited, almost holding their breath for what would come next. And then, at last, Daniel let his hands rest. He pressed one final note, long and trembling, a sound that rose like a cry and then softened into silence. That silence was heavier than the music itself. No one clapped, no one cheered. For a long moment, no one even breathed. The sound of that final note hung in the air as if it had carved itself into the walls, into the stones, into the hearts of every creature there. It was gone, yet it remained, echoing inside them in ways they could not understand. Aliens who had never cried in their lives wiped their faces in disbelief. Warriors who had sworn never to show weakness bowed their heads, ashamed yet relieved that they could finally feel. Mothers held their children closer, whispering softly as if afraid to speak too loudly. Even the lords, proud and cold, sat with their eyes red and their dignity broken, unable to hide what had happened to them. One alien finally tried to speak, but his voice cracked and failed. Another opened her mouth, but only sobs came out. The silence held them all, each one still trapped in the echo of the human's last note. It was not the end of music. It was the beginning of something inside them that would never be the same. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. They were tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much in life, but there was no anger in them. He looked at the Xenotone resting in his hands. Its glow faded back to soft light, like a candle after the wind has passed. He placed it carefully on the stand in front of him, almost like laying a friend to rest. Then he rose from his seat. The aliens watched him stand, but none of them moved. They could not. They were still bound by the weight of what they had heard. Some lowered their heads when his gaze passed over them, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Others looked at him with awe, unable to believe that a single human had done what none of them had ever imagined possible. Daniel did not smile, did not bow. He simply stood there, calm, his silence saying more than words ever could. His presence was no longer that of a guest mocked for weakness. It was the presence of a man who had shown them their own hidden souls. The young alien who had first mocked him, the one who had shoved the Xenotone into his hands, stared with wide eyes. His mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came out. He felt his pride collapse inside him. The human he had wanted to humiliate had instead changed the hall, broken their arrogance, and left them all trembling. The hall felt different now. The banners on the walls seemed smaller, the golden chairs less grand. What mattered was no longer the wealth or the power displayed there. What mattered was the silence still echoing from the last note of the Xenotone. Daniel took one step back from the stand. His boots echoed softly against the stone floor, and even that sound made the aliens flinch, as though it might shatter what was left of the moment. He stood still, breathing quietly, letting them take in what had happened. Some aliens began to bow their heads to him, something no one would have imagined only an hour ago. They did not even realize they were doing it. It was instinct, respect pulled from the deepest part of themselves. Others wiped their eyes in shame, whispering apologies too quiet for anyone to hear. The human had come into their hall as an outsider, mocked and insulted, but he had left them silent and humbled. The final note had done more than end the song. It had ended their laughter, ended their arrogance, ended the walls they had built around their own hearts. Daniel remained still, watching them for a moment longer, and then turned slowly, ready to leave the hall. No one stopped him. No one dared. They were too busy holding on to the memory of the sound he had given them, too afraid that speaking might cause it to fade away. That night, the aliens would remember not the feast, not the laughter, not the mocking. They would remember the silence after the final note, and they would remember the human who had given it to them. Daniel turned away from the Xenotone and began walking slowly toward the doors of the great hall. His steps were steady, each one echoing softly in the silence that still clung to the room. He did not look back. He did not bow or wait for thanks. He had given them everything in that one song, and there was nothing left to say. The air was heavy with what he had left behind. No one dared move. No one dared break the moment. For a long time, the aliens simply sat in their places, frozen, their minds trying to understand what had just happened. These were the same beings who had invited him here to laugh, to mock, to turn him into a joke. But their laughter was gone, replaced by something new, something frightening and beautiful at the same time. They had felt their own hearts for the first time. They had felt sorrow and hope in ways they had never allowed themselves before. The first alien to stand was one of the nobles. His fine robes shimmered in the light, but his eyes were red from tears. Slowly, he placed his hands together in a gesture of respect used only for those they considered great teachers. Others followed, their claws, their hands, their strange limbs all forming the same gesture. Soon, the entire hall had bowed their heads toward the human who was already at the door. Daniel did not notice their gestures. He did not need to. He had not played for respect or for honor. He had played because music was the only way left to speak the truth inside him. But the aliens would never forget the moment. For them, that night would mark the beginning of change. One of the alien commanders whispered into the silence, his voice shaking. Only a human could do this. The words spread like a quiet fire, repeated in hushed tones by others across the hall. They had always seen humans as fragile, weak, and small. Yet here was a man who had brought an entire hall of warriors, nobles, and lords to tears without lifting a weapon, without raising his voice. He had shown them that strength was not only found in muscle or battle, it was found in the soul. Daniel reached the doors, and they opened slowly before him. The cool night air drifted inside, carrying with it the smell of rain and earth. He stepped out without looking back, leaving the hall behind. Inside, the aliens remained in silence for many minutes after he was gone, each of them lost in thought. Some sat with their faces in their hands, still shaking. Others stared at the floor, their pride shattered, their hearts open in ways they had never imagined possible. When at last someone spoke, it was not laughter or mockery. It was a quiet, reverent tone. "He is not weak," one alien said. "He is the soul of two worlds." Others nodded slowly. The name spread from mouth to mouth until it filled the hall. The soul of two worlds. That was what they began to call him. Not a weak human, not a joke, but a bridge between their kind and his. Word of what had happened in the Great Hall did not stay there. It spread through the city, then through the lands beyond. Aliens who had not even been there heard the stories. They did not believe them at first. How could a human make hardened warriors cry? How could simple music bring nobles to their knees? But the ones who had been there swore it was true. They described the silence, the tears, the way the Xenotone had glowed with light as if alive. And slowly disbelief turned into wonder. From that day on, alien culture began to shift. Where once they had dismissed music as a game, they now began to see it as something powerful, something sacred. More and more of them sought the Xenotone, not to mock, but to understand. And always they remembered the human who had shown them what it could truly be. Daniel did not stay to watch the change. He returned to his quiet life, his small farm, his mornings spent in silence. He did not boast of what he had done. He did not speak of it at all. To him, it was not glory. It was simply truth. But sometimes, late at night, he would look at the stars and think of the hall, of the silence after the last note, and wonder if his music had truly reached them. The aliens, however, never forgot. Statues were built, songs were written, and children were told stories of the night a human made their proudest warriors cry. To many, it was the first time they understood that strength did not always come from claws or swords. Sometimes it came from the heart. Years later, when Daniel's name was spoken in alien courts, it was no longer with scorn. It was spoken with respect, with reverence. He was remembered as the one who opened their hearts, the one who carried the weight of two worlds in a single song. Even when he was gone, his music lived in them. They would never forget the silence after that final note, and they would never again call humans weak. Daniel had walked into the hall as a man they planned to humiliate. He walked out as something far greater, a symbol, a legend, a reminder of what it meant to feel. And from that night forward, no alien who had heard him play could ever laugh at humans again. They had seen the truth, and the truth had left them in tears.